I know lately we've been talking about like like Porsche 911 RSTs and things like that. Um, but some part of me also wants to say it's not really a joke anymore, right? This is something that is something you can realistically buy and things like that. But um, one thing I wanted to ask you is if you were to go back, you know, 5 years before you even started in real estate, you were still working at UPS and all that good stuff. Would something like this, like your level of success that you have now and being able to, move your family to a different state, build custom homes, right? If I'm not mistaken, um, build out a sick backyard from scratch, all that good stuff. Is that something that has been like, yeah, I always knew I was gonna get to this level?
I wouldn't say I knew without a shadow of a doubt. However, we do and have been doing vision workshops. You know this, Jin. We've been doing vision since we first started. We're firm believers if we don't have a target, what are we aiming at? And we were reviewing one of our visions from almost 10 years ago, and I had almost an identical square foot bed bath count, garage count on an acre lot property that we ended up buying as our primary home. So I wouldn't say I didn't fully disbelieve I could. It was just still too far out for me to believe it was attainable anytime soon.
Okay. And so you say anytime soon, what does that mean in terms of like timeline for you then?
That vision was I think it was in the 10 to 20 year gap range. And that was maybe about 7 years ago.
Nice.
So we beat it. That was cool. And I honestly forgot about it. I've had it so often in my vision that I remember seeing it year over year, but never really thought about it when we were going through the process of actually building it. It was after it was completed.
Yeah, you bring up such a interesting fact because, Min and I, we actually, when we first started dating, we actually set our own vision and goals and things like that. We were engaged at the time, so not even quite married yet. And some of those things in there were like, we're gonna have our own house, we're gonna potentially have a child, we're gonna have a dog, all these things that we envisioned, right? And we wrote down at some point. And I want to say it was like last year, Renee like opened up our original vision document. It was like, holy crap, we actually knocked off like 90% of these things, and we said we're gonna do this in 5 years, and it's only been like two.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and there's something about it. I think there's some higher power, whatever you believe in, that when you do put it out there, your subconscious mind just kind of makes the right decisions for you, right? You just do it without thinking. Like you mentioned, like you weren't even thinking about it in the moment. You remember writing it down and looking at it, but then one day you blink and you're like, oh my God. You know what I mean? And I think that's the same experience for you, right? In a much bigger way. Yeah. Awesome. And so going back into, back then, right? I know we brought up like where you were back then and then, envisioning all these things and things like that. Tell me a little bit more about the process of like, how did you go from like zero properties or anything like that to eventually setting your sights onto real estate in the first place? Because I know you tried a lot of different things and you always had the vision of getting to this place, but was real estate always a part of that plan for you?
No, it wasn't. It became part of the plan after many failed attempts in starting businesses. And I mean, this goes back to my origin story. Working UPS is a good, stable job. It was everything that I was taught to look for and find, and I got it. And we tend to accept things when it's comfortable until the pain becomes too much. And for me, the pain was I wasn't seeing my family, wasn't seeing my wife, my kids, wasn't being able to experience these memories that I would never be able to create again as they were growing up. That made me realize the trading time for money concept wasn't working for me at UPS. No matter how much they paid me or how secure this job was, it wasn't something I was willing to tolerate forever. And that's where everything started to shift. And Jazz was the brainchild behind real estate, not me. She was already looking into it and found that buy and hold for cash flow could easily become the solution to replace my income It wasn't like, hey, replace your income tomorrow. It wasn't like get rich quick or anything. It was, hey, maybe we can retire you 5 years early because we know you don't like your job, which at the time was a lot of time to be 5 years early. Just following this concept of maybe buy one rental property a year. In 10 years, we had 10 properties and they're worth about $1 million. Like it was just this slow churn type of thinking. But because my pain was so great, I didn't want to wait that long, but I wasn't committed to real estate at first because I didn't believe it. I didn't think I'm from Hawaii. How am I going to buy properties 3,000-4,000 miles away? I don't even know anything about real estate, and all these limiting beliefs came in my head. So instead I pivoted and reverted to what I thought I knew, which is what I could physically do myself. Back to that small-minded thinking, I went off and I created things I had experience with, detailing cars, landscaping, house cleaning, things I could physically do and could comprehend at the time that maybe I could create money in exchange for walking away from UPS. But the irony in that is starting businesses aren't easy. They often fail, which mine did. And I was spending far more time than I was when I was working UPS. So it was kind of defeating the purpose. You know what I mean? And that's when real estate really kind of came on the forefront. Like, okay, Jazz is still focused on this. We're right here. There's a deal right now. I got to get over myself. Let's just take a shot.
Yeah. And then that makes a lot of sense. And that was actually some of the things I was like thinking about when you were talking about you wanted to start all these other businesses and things like that. Because you literally just said, right, you were wanting to spend more time with your kids because these moments are gone. Once they hit that milestone, you can't get to, hey, can you come back and like show me again, do that violin recital over again or something like that. It's not, yeah, exactly, right? And then starting all these businesses, yeah, like it's not easy. You end up spending more time trying to get that up and running, and quite often than not for less income, right? Especially when you're first starting out any kind of business. And so you mentioned going to that was that limiting belief, staying in what you know. So let's dig into that a little bit. What was it about, wanting to stay in what you know versus venturing out and doing something different?
The perception of control. A lot of what you do in real estate investing, especially as a newbie doing out of state or in a city you don't live in type of model, you don't have much control. You're not there. It's not easy to go there. You got to release it, right? And I don't know, maybe it was the man mentality of thinking like, oh, I need to control stuff. That male egotistic type of a thing. Like, hey, I got to control everything because then I feel like I can predict almost what's about to happen because I have control, and I need to shift from that because the control aspect, it's not even real. Like I thought I had control over my job, but the moment I got injured on the job, I was replaced like this. So there was no control over my security or my position. It's the perception of they gave me control, they gave me my route so I could run it the way I want. But the moment I was removed, the route still was ran, and it was run different. I didn't like the fact that it was being run different, and that perception of control got removed. Once I started seeing that in real estate, like, hey, if I understand I can control only a limited amount of things, but learn how to manage the controlling aspect of the emotion with the team members and those that I don't control, I can still create positive results. Like, does that making sense? I had to come to that conclusion of releasing the perception I had control over everything versus focusing on the things that I knew I could control, which is really me. That's it. How I respond to things, how I think of things, how I act on things, and focus on getting better at being, expert or more mature. I think Jazz called me, you matured a lot when you start focusing on working on yourself, less about the things I can't control. Then it became easier to grab a hold of this concept, like I can do this. The things that I was trying to control, house cleaning, landscaping, car detailing, these startup businesses that I had my hands in everything, weren't working either. So I had to shift.
And so for someone that's just getting started or, looking to get started, how does one accept that? You know what I mean? Like you said, you started doing it, right? But how does one start that process of like, okay, I do need to let go of the fact that I might not be able to see the property with my own eyes. I have to let go of the fact that I'm not going to be the one interviewing each tenant and doing their background checks. I got to let go of the fact that I'm not going to be the one out there painting the walls, putting down the flooring and things like that, because that's somewhat of that same limiting belief of staying in what you know, right? But how do you get to that point of letting go? Was it something you just, all right, I'm just going to trust the process, Jazz, you got it? Or how did you guys go about that? Because that's a big thing to let go.
In my journey, it was really just creating results to give me indication on where I need to release things. Oftentimes we're defeating ourselves first up here, so it keeps us from ever starting. Maybe I didn't do it the ideal way or a way that other people may agree, but by me starting those businesses, it revealed to me the issues that I could work through, that I need to work through to make it possible for me to go and do out-of-state investing. Like for me, it was always, I'm learning and growing from everything that was happening. So yeah, it didn't work. Yeah, it was a failure. These failures redirected me to the areas that I need to improve on first to find success in real estate. So my recommendation for anybody new is to go and get started and start with something. But be open to the process evolving through your progression. We like to say, be ready to pivot in our community. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. So if you're comfortable doing this, what is something that is uncomfortable that you could shift into? Because in that shift from comfort to uncomfort, you're going to realize something inside of you is not going to like it. And for me, it was the control. Right? Going from having businesses that I knew I could run or do or had some experience in to not knowing a thing about real estate, but still taking that leap. My key thing that was holding me from this was control. But it only showed up because I tried this and then I shifted to the uncomfortable. Then I got to address it and work through it and develop that muscle that, cool, yeah, I can't control the method or the team, but I can control how I view deals, how I analyze deals, how I approach purchases, how I approach networking, who do I want to work with, what is their skill set, how do I want to lead the team, like these other things I could control, which then took the uncomfortable and made it comfortable again. And then I went back, what is the next uncomfortable thing? And this is this ebb and flow of going back and forth, because what was once uncomfortable will eventually become comfortable.
Okay.
And the growth process will require you to always be in that uncomfortable phase, which means you're always moving yourself back out and develop. So take action, really, is what it is. You got to start moving in some direction to see what shows up and then address it.
It makes a lot of sense. And you're saying, shift to that thing that's uncomfortable. Would it be safe to say like that uncomfortable thing is something that it's just the unknown, right? And so if there's something that you're embarking on that's brand new, of course it's going to be uncomfortable because we don't know what to expect, right? The metaphor I like to use is like, children are afraid of the dark, right? Why are they afraid of the dark? It's because they cannot see. They don't know what to expect, what's across the room. As adults, of course, we know, right? But for children, we can prove that if they can just see what to expect by just turning on the light, all of a sudden that fear is gone, right? It's no longer uncomfortable. And so, unfortunately, in real life, we don't have a light switch that would just be like, just show me everything I need to know about real estate investing, right? It's all about, okay, there is this blind spot that I have. And what you're just saying right now is like to get uncomfortable, to move yourself into that blind spot, because it will then, it's almost like turning on the light switch in that one room, for example, right? So there's a lot of aspects to real estate investing because this is a massive thing. How do I understand the market? That's one room. You got to flip the light switch on, and that's just, you just got to go in there, analyze it, run your numbers, etc. Right? How do I manage contractors from afar? There's another room, another dark room that we don't know, and we just got to get into that room and figure it out, find the light switch, so to speak, right? So getting uncomfortable, then that becomes comfortable, and in essence, you've turned on the light in that room, and now you can move on to that next step. And so I love that, right? Like just being able to, okay, it's not an all-in-one. You don't have to jump in 2 feet, that popular metaphor everyone says, like jump out of the plane, assemble a parachute on the way down. Sure, that's one way to do it, but it sounds like for you, it was more of like, okay, I accept this part. I can control how I handle these situations, and I know I can handle that. Let me just do this. It's a little uncomfortable. But once you did it, you realize, hey, that wasn't that bad, right? And then now you move on to the next thing that you're unfamiliar with, the unknown, and then you just took it piece by piece, right? And so let's break down like your first couple of deals, actually, right? Now that you've made that shift, you decided to work alongside Jazz into real estate. Tell me about like how you guys decided on your first deal.
First deal was, hey, Jazz, go find it. That was literally the first deal. And being that we didn't know what we didn't know, one of the things that got us moving in the right direction was first identifying the method, right? Because the method kind of opens up everything. It's the general target we're looking to achieve. So for us, the method was buy and hold for cash flow. That automatically eliminated our backyard, Hawaii, because you don't cash flow in Hawaii, or it's extremely challenging and it requires a lot of capital, which we didn't have experience in real estate, and we didn't have a lot of capital. So once we understood the method, we identified a market. And the market ended up being in the United States, out in the Midwest, where houses were priced more accordingly and favorable for cash flow. And they weren't worth the $1 million houses in Hawaii. We're looking at $100,000 to $200,000 homes in the Midwest. And we started seeking a network who has already gone there. Because we didn't know. I mean, we don't want to completely start from scratch. We were also very open to redirection or referral from somebody who has found success already, and we tapped into that.
Yeah.
So Jazz and I would network a lot in the beginning before our first transaction, just to understand the different methods, to understand the Hawaii market, and then it really didn't reveal anything possible for our cash flow method. So we started looking outside, and we met people who were doing it outside, and they turned us on to a turnkey company. Turnkey company is basically a glorified flipper who sells to an investor a rental property that's cash flow. That's all they are. So there was no real headache or work in theory that was needed. It was just come up with this much down, come up with the rest financed, buy the property, and walk into X amount in cash flow. And that's what we did for our first deal. We leveraged the network once we knew the method in the market to go and find that first deal. We just plugged away our typical 25% down.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot of important key points that you brought up in that, right? In that, just the first deal in and of itself. The first thing you mentioned a lot was about networking, right? Going out there and having these conversations with folks. And you had the strategy, right? You went out there and discovered that, okay, you know what? This is our strategy, cash flow strategy. Why doesn't work for us? Just the nature of the local market is, you know, average price now is over $1 million, and there's just nothing that's going to cash flow in that area unless you bought it all cash, which is unrealistic, or if you did a significant down payment, like a $500,000 down payment, and also unrealistic, right? So you guys settled on Midwest, and then you went out and interviewed and talked to people who are already doing it out in those states, right? So that was the key lesson in there. And then another thing too was the fact that you guys did turnkey, right? People right now might look at you and they say, oh, well, CJ's known as the burr guy. That means he's going out there, he's buying things off market, he's buying through a network of realtors, he's got contractors for this, he's got a roofing guy, he's got a foundation guy, he's got a blah, blah, blah guy. Then he has this property manager and this other property manager that's in this specific part of the town. Well, they look at you and they see all of that, right? And just earlier, we were just talking about, okay, well, it's all a matter of like, you don't have to jump 2 feet and jump out of the airplane, assemble a parachute on the way down. A lot of people might see that about your success, about where you're at now, like the kinds of deals that you're doing now. And right now you're doing commercial, let's be real, right? You're not even really doing these single family homes anymore. But people might see you and then say, okay, that's just too much, right? But what's very revealing, very interesting, and that I believe everyone needs to know is like your first deal was the most easiest thing you could do, turnkey. All you didn't need to know about the market, really. I mean, you kind of already did your research and you picked that property because it was in a market that you liked, but you didn't have to do any of the rehab. You didn't have to do any of the property manager interviews. You didn't have to do the background, checks for the tenants. It was literally, you had to come up with this amount of money, put it down, bada bing, bada boom. But I can almost guarantee you that you had some fears, some unknowns, some bits of discomfort, if you will, before you even put that money down. Can you walk us through, right? Because for us, right, you and I, turnkey is literally the easiest thing anyone can do, right? But for anyone
Right.
that's brand new, especially for you at that time, can you walk us through some of the thoughts, some of the fears that you had before you even put that 20-25% down on a turnkey property?
Yeah. How do we know they're not lying? How do we know the property's real? How do we know the tenant's actually paying? How do we know that they did the right rehab? How do we know that this isn't a fraud, a scam? You know, like there's a lot of people out there that will share the not so glamorous stories of real estate in a sense where, oh, I got suckered into a scam where they took all my money. Like, how do I know? It was just a lot of how do I know?
Mm.
And it compounded because we were 4,000 miles away from the property. It wasn't like we could just drive to the next city and see it. It was thousands of dollars to fly up there, which we didn't think it was valuable enough either. So we're kind of like stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do we go up there, spend precious money that we could use towards a down payment, or do we just take this leap of faith, trusting the process that somebody else has already shown us could work, and get a proof of concept?
Mm. So how did you said there's, how do I know this is that? How do I know blah, 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 blah? Was it just a blind leap of faith then at that point? Or how did you have a process to kind of answer these questions? Or, how did you go about that?
Literally just pulled the trigger, because we could have, I mean, I look back and that would have been the opportunity for us to be in analysis paralysis, a reason to be indecisive on the decision we said we wanted to do. When opportunity was presented, you get to act quickly. And for us, we thought about it, we acknowledged the fear, and we were like, screw it, if we don't try this, how are we ever going to know? And we kind of just did it.
Mm.
And that's how we've grown pretty much all of our portfolio since. It's like we know enough to say yes. And will things go wrong? Probably. And I get to address it when it does, but I'm not going to use that future excuse to why I can't do it today, because what if it doesn't?
Mm.
So is that Robert Kiyosaki analogy, right? They're not two sides to a coin, but three. When you learn to straddle the edge, you get to see the both sides of the coin and make an informed, educated decision, acknowledging the risk you're taking. Once we understood to stand on the edge, it was neither, oh, well, what if it's a scam? What if they're not paying? What if it's this or that? Versus, okay, what if it is a legit deal? What if it is performing? What if it is rehabbed right? And we got to ask those questions to counterbalance the negativity. And then we found out through the process, there were things we could do to ensure that, hey, the tenant is paying. We could see the lease. We could request for financials. We could do an inspection to ensure the rehab was done. We could check the property tax record and make sure it was a real property. Like we found things because we started to straddle the edge to counterbalance what the negativity or the made up fear, and allow the process to reveal that there are solutions if I'm willing to look at it. And that's how we combat it. We went through the act of transacting on the deal, which then brought up the fear and the in the head made up scenarios. But then standing on the edge revealed to us we could do an inspection. There is a due diligence. We can renegotiate. We can make sure that the tenant's financially sound, that they have been paying rent. Like we could counteract everything. And after following that process, it was easy to go through the transaction. Doesn't make it something that we were like, oh, this is going to work 100%. It just made us feel better to continue forward.
So in essence, you had all these made up scenarios in your head, right? Because you heard stories from someone's cousin's uncle one time a long time ago, and you took it as fact or something like that that's going to happen to you. But what you're saying is that you still went in and did your due diligence. You got enough information to make a decision to move forward, right? You still made this decision to move forward, even though you were not 100% like, okay, yeah, this is a no-brainer. You're just like, hey, we have these bits of information, and we're gonna move forward anyways, right? And so, at this point, I'm sure anyone that's watching this is dying to know, how did that property go? Was it great? Was it terrible? How was it?
It was probably the best turnkey property we ever bought. And, we didn't know what we didn't know. And part of it might be luck. And part of it, I want to contribute to success, wanted to reward us with a win. And this property gave us the confidence to continue on. It turned out to be our best performing turnkey. We held it for 6 years before we offloaded it and moved it into a large commercial asset. Tenants stayed there for 3 out of the 6 years, and then we were able to quickly fill it again with above market rent 3 years after they moved out on that 3rd year. And it was always cash flowing. It was probably the most painless turnkey property we ever owned.
Okay. And you say it is the most painless one that you've ever owned. That contrast leads me to believe that you had a very painful one. So that's awesome, right? The fact that your first deal it just happened to be amazing, right? Tell us a little bit more about the second one then.
Second one was a complete opposite. So even though we learned to look at the counterbalance, we got too excited and heavy on it's going to work out. We can figure it out, right? You got arrogant, cocky, whatever you want to call it. That's what the second one was, where we skipped a lot of the due diligence or the investigating on what could go wrong and counterbalancing what could go right. We just went, it can only go right because the first one went right. We were too optimistic, which led us to overpay, to buy a property without paying attention to the inspection and not vet the tenant that was in place, which ended up being a homeless person that signed a fake lease that was squatting there because they didn't want to live out in the winter, and completely trashed the house. Not to mention the rehab was subpar, where they missed the crucial CapEx items or the mechanicals, the electrical, the plumbing, the HVAC and roof. All this was done in poor rehab condition. So we not only overpaid, we never collected a dime in rent. We had to evict the homeless person. We had to go back in and redo all the rehab. We were all in maybe 50 grand more than what we should have been at the end of the day to just get it performing day one. And that was deal 2.
So 2 completely opposite sides of the coin, if you will. One, you did the due diligence, you got enough information to be comfortable to move forward. The second one was a little hasty just because of, let's be real, you had such a great experience with the first one. Why wouldn't the second one be the exact same, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it's still an important lesson to learn. So just so we understand the timeline between the first and second one, was it like, you mentioned 6 years you held on to that. When was the second purchase actually for you?
1 year after the first one closed.
Okay. And then you had a terrible experience with that one, right? And then what about the next one? What was the time frame between number 2 and number 3 then? 2 and 3,
2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 were pretty much all within the same month. We went gun ho, right? But that initial one that kind of closed all along with the other 4, we didn't realize that was a problem until we closed on all of them. So at that point, we owned about 6 doors very quickly, but one of the 6 was eviction, a turnover, and blah, blah, blah. It was a very bad buy. But the other 4 were decent. They were okay. They weren't in that same position. And again, maybe we got lucky for just taking massive action. Success wanted to reward us. But hey, in the meantime, we learned this lesson because it's crucial for your next level, which is the eviction and the diligence aspect. So we scaled up to 6, all within a short period of time, 1 year after our initial purchase.
Okay. So you went from the first property, and 1 year later, you bought 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, kind of like that, or?
Pretty much.
Okay, got it. So you actually had a really good. It was actually when you think about it, then, right? It wasn't like you had one great property then one bad property. It was like one great property, then the other ones had some very decent ones, and then 1 or 2 bad ones. And so that kind of balanced out. Would you say it balanced out the bad ones with the other 4 good ones?
It balanced out in theory, and more importantly, having that many doors that quickly made that one dysfunctioning property a lot more manageable to handle versus if we only had one other one that was performing. Because we created a large portfolio quickly, one unperformer was able to be floated by the others that were performing.
Yeah, man, that is a very important lesson in and of itself, right? Is, having 1 or 2 properties is actually, honestly, the worst idea anyone could ever have, right? the irony of it, and you actually mentioned it in one of your other posts, is that like the overwhelming majority of your average investor, right, out there is stuck at one or two doors, right? Um, Tell me a little bit more about why that happens and why that's such a bad. Well, we kind of know, right? You just you shared the secret sauce already, right? But why that is like, what are some other aspects of why having only one or two doors is such a bad idea?
So why does it happen to new investors first would be they have one or the other experience. It's really great or it's really horrible. And then they stop. When it's really great, they set a bar of unrealistic expectations for it to be repeatable. It's like, think of it like playing baseball, right? Your first ever at bat in the pros and you hit a home run. You're going to repeat it? Probably not. But you're up there in the batter's box saying, that's not the pitch. Even though it's down the middle, it's off to the right. I don't know if I have, the weather's turning great. And you start to make these reasons up on why it's not as great as the first one, which then keeps them from growing on that second. And then you go the polar opposite. Maybe they have an experience like my second deal, where it's a cluster monkey of a bad property, and then they quit. Instead of learning from it, they decide that this isn't for them because they've had a negative experience. I can't make anything better. That's like playing baseball again and striking out on your first at bat and saying, I'm never going to be able to hit, so I'm not going to try to swing ever again. Either way, they take it to the extreme.
So going back into like why people stop, it's like the one or the other, like you mentioned, it was, oh man, it was so good, you know, and then people are kind of looking for that home run deal again. Is that what you're saying?
You're looking for perfect, and it's never there.
So dive into that a little bit
quite
more.
Honestly, that's what keeps most people from actually doing their first deal is they are looking for perfect. It's not real.
Right. And you know what's interesting about my first deal? Do you remember my first deal? So my first deal, it was the numbers were after you do the burr and you do that 80% cash out refinance, I was expecting to leave about $10,000 of equity in that deal, right? And for me at the time, it was just like you. It's like I still had a lot of what if this happened below, and it was right before COVID, if you remember that too, right? I was like, oh my God, CJ, what if we get this deal and then I get a tenant and then they lose their job because of COVID? You remember? I was freaking out, and so I would go into the same process that you did, right? It's just like all these what ifs, fake scenarios that never really happened, right? But no, going back into that, I remember the numbers on that deal. It was like, okay, it's not going to be a perfect deal, but it is what it is, right? It's my first deal. It's not supposed to be perfect. And we did it. And it turned out to be a home run of a deal. I actually pulled out 10K, if you remember, right? Because it actually appraised for more than what we expected, like way more. And so for that deal, I was like, oh my God, her strategy is great. The hilarious thing is every deal after that hasn't been a home run where I was able to pull equity out of it and put it back into my pocket. I was able to pull everything out, you know, or, you know, leave 10, 15 grand into it. That's actually the majority of the cases. I had to leave a little bit of equity into it after that cash out refinance. And it's been a unicorn. Like my first deal was that, but thankfully I also had you as my mentor. You're like, okay, that's great. When are you going to get the second one, right? Because the second one definitely wasn't a home run of a deal. And so the people who have that experience of a great home run deal, they're looking for this unicorn of a deal, and that stops them from getting the second one. The flip side of the coin is they had such a bad experience that they tap out and they don't even go further. That's stopping them from going to the next one, right? And so I guess how do people, if they're watching this, that, oh my God, you're talking about me right now, I'm the one that's stuck at one or two, how would you tell them, what advice would you give them to get over that hump? Hey, just get to 3, get to 4, get to 5.
Have a mentor. You gotta have somebody that's willing to challenge and push you. I often use like training in a gym analogy. Like you can go and figure out how to work out on your own and create mediocre results. You can go and join a group class where you're part of a small selected group and you get some guidance on higher level training. But the best training to get the quickest results, to get you the full improvement on whatever workout or physical condition you're trying to train for, would be to hire a personal trainer directly. Because now they can customize it specifically for you and your situation and your end goal in mind. If you got one or two, that's great, but you may be tapped at or capped at your knowledge, your thinking of possibility, your creativity, your network, all of that and more that's keeping you from deal 3 through 10. Getting in the right space with the right mentor or coach could elevate you, 10x you, change your total trajectory by just giving you guidance here and there with a simple word or two on, hey, pivot to this strategy. Hey, adjust for this. Hey, focus on OPM. Little guidance, and then being held accountable, knowing that this person's already gone before and done it, gives them the credibility to speak the uncomfortable truth to you when you're not showing up to work out, but you say you want to be in top physical shape. Get your butt to the gym. That's a good mentor. Somebody who's going to be kind to you, not nice, and challenge you in what you said you want and hold you accountable, because you're going to say, I want this, but you're actually going to go this way. You need to be open to and coachable where they can pull you back into being in alignment to what you said you want and what they're asking you to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's perfectly in line with my experience. That's how I got to my 7 doors, right? It wasn't just me on my own. I definitely had you to lean on. But also, what I think is also equally as important was being a part of the community of WNN, right? Because when I look at the folks inside of WNN, they are not the 1 or 2 property kinds of people. They are the ones that continuously grow, blah, 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 right? We have people going from none to 10 in 1 year. And when you're in that group and you see other people doing that, that becomes the norm. You know what I mean? And so not only did I have you to lean on to give me the specific tactical advice, but I also had other people in the community like Brandon that I can just reach out to and talk to, and then more importantly, talk to somebody with experience, right? Who's also going through the same crap that I'm going through, versus me talking to my cousin or my uncle who's gonna bring me down and say, oh, you should stop that, blah, 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 it's risky, you're gonna lose all your money. But that uncle has no properties, probably, still renting, God forbid. And, all these situations. So surrounding myself with not being around you, but also your other mentees that you've mentored and you've helped grow also helped big time for me, because I could go to somebody who was at my level, not to someone who was so far ahead of me that almost seemed untouchable, right, at the time. But having my peer next to me going through the same crap together, it's almost like boot camp, right? Because I went to the Marine Corps. Having your instructors tell you what to do is one thing, but having your buddy next to you going through the same shit is like, okay, now you're motivated to keep going, because that's the norm, right? You're surrounding yourself with people who are continuously holding themselves accountable, taking the specific actions that you are telling us to do, because that's what's required in order to get to that next property. That was a huge help for me too. And I just wanted to point that out, having a mentor, and also having a greater community that you can lean on, so you can, just lean on each other, talk to each other and support each other and things like that. And even if there's someone one step behind you, that was one thing you also taught me, is like, okay, you have 1 property, you can still teach the guy with 0. Whereas like internally for me, I was like, I don't know, man, like I don't have, the 70 that you had at the time. I don't have 70 like you have right now. You'd be better fit to teach this person than I do, because I only have 1. And you taught me, it's like, no, you're actually better fit, because you're right there. You can still talk about those fresh experiences that I already forgot about. And that was very helpful for me, right, to learn from my peers, and also just help the guy that's right behind me. So, but yeah, that was great. Getting over that hump, just to recap, finding that mentor, surrounding yourself with the right people, to get to that breakthrough, that 1 to 2 ceiling, if you will. And then the other question I really wanted to ask you is, why is it such a bad idea to stay stuck at 1 or 2?
It's dangerous. I mean, you're sitting there putting everything in 1 property, hoping that it's going to work, and it's like planting 1 seed, hoping you'll have a forest. Not likely, and extremely dangerous. Oftentimes when people walk into this type of investing, like how I was, they're wanting to achieve a bigger goal. I wanted to replace my income. That required replacing $10,000 a month, right? If I stuck with just 1 and waited, I would never have even retired early either. I would probably be working longer because I got to wait on one to produce the 10. It's not going to happen. Versus I have 10, I'm 10 times closer. 20 times closer, 50 times. And that's why we scaled to a large portfolio in a short period of time, because we realized playing small doesn't serve my big goals and dreams. That's comfort. So going back to the being uncomfortable, comfort is I can do 1. Cool. Challenge yourself to do 2, then 4, then 8, then 16. You know, you're wanting to grow. The moment you start staying complacent, you put everything at risk. Because nothing's slowing down. The market, the financial situation, the strength of the dollar, all of this is changing minute after minute. If you try to stay simple and small, you're going to be left behind. You got to be up with and willing to run with what you call success. So having that mentor and that accountability in the community will challenge you when they see you slowing down. It's like running in a pack. You're trying to keep pace. The one person starts dropping back, everybody in the pack's going to take notice, and they're going to encourage them to pick it back up. Why? Because we all have these big goals. We all have this journey we're running on. Keep up. Don't fall behind. And if you choose to fall behind, it's very easy for you to quit because you are distancing yourself from everybody else who's creating success, which often creates that thinking, that shift from I can to, oh, look, they can, but I can't, because the distance is growing. You want to stay in the pack, even though it's tiring, even though it's uncomfortable, even though it's hard. You stay with the pack, you'll cover more ground. Mentorship will keep you from being stuck at 1, because why settle? If you're taking that initial risk, go for it big. Aim for that big, audacious goal. Rather than just, oh, let me just do one and I'm comfortable, but nothing in life actually changes. So really, was it worth all that risk if you're only going to just stay the same? Probably not.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another important thing too was like your story that you just shared, where you bought your first and then you bought your second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, right? That in that rapid succession, you even said earlier, like having more is that you're kind of spreading your risk across multiple properties, because those other 4 that you mentioned actually floated the 1 or 2 that didn't do so well, right? And then in a greater picture, right? I remember your story about COVID and going through that. At that point, you were closer to 90, I think, right? Doors at that time, and COVID hit your portfolio pretty hard, if I recall correctly. But you still were able to pivot and solve this problem and stay afloat ultimately, right? Walk us through like the power of going for that big audacious goal and having so many doors that it didn't really affect you, even though it might have devastated that 1 or 2 property investor.
It's just as simple. The more you have, the less risk you incur, in my opinion. Or you put yourself at less vulnerability because you have the volume to cover the few one-offs that may not perform. And COVID made a huge opportunity for us to test this theory because renters didn't have to pay rent. It was just the rule at the time, and we couldn't enforce as landlords. However, we still had fixed expenses. But not everybody that rented from us enforced that type of rule because they realized, well, I can pay rent, I'll pay rent. They're good and bad tenants, and a majority of our portfolio were good tenants, and we had a good chunk that weren't. They were willing to manipulate the system and process because they were in financial hardship, and totally get it. But we never had to be in a position of, oh my goodness, we're not able to hold this, because we had so much numbers of doors. We were able to hedge the risk by having the volume. 1 property, 1 vacancy, 100% vacant. 2 properties, 1 vacancy, 50% vacancy. Every door you add lowers that percentage. So when you amass a large enough portfolio, go with 100 doors, 1 goes vacant, you're 1% vacant on your portfolio. Do you want the 1 or the 50?
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. And so in essence, right, having more, you're spreading out that risk so that it's almost like backwards thinking, especially for a new person. It's like, well, I don't want to take on too much risk, so I'm just going to buy 1, right? But in reality, what ends up happening is, well, you buy 1 and that person decides to move out after the first year, you're 100% vacant. Now you're floating that mortgage payment by yourself, versus if you had 10, right? that one person moves out after the lease expires, you're at a 10% vacancy, right? And then of course, to your scale, having 100 doors is like so safe actually, where people can move out. You can have 10 people move out at the same time and you'll still be good, right? Because you have 90 other doors that are performing. And so having more and then being able to continuously grow to a point where you're almost you're too big to fail. You know what I mean? And so,
And it leads me back to my thinking of what one of my mentors shared with me. What separates the best from the rest is reps.
hey,
When you do one deal, you don't know if you're lucky or if you have skill. But when you can repeat it and get to 100, you're developing skills that you may not even knew you needed, from door 1 to 2, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 100. That puts you in a better position because now you have more experience. Somebody with 1 or 2 doors may have some experience and may still question whether or not it was luck. Somebody who gets to 100 doors can definitely stand with confidence and conviction that I've earned my experience and success. This isn't luck, because they've gone through their highs and lows while they grew their portfolio, but they were consistently learning and they were consistently growing. That's how you get to the 100, which then makes you a better investor. I was not the same investor when I had my large portfolio that I was on day one. I was far more confident, more experienced, more skilled in everything I needed to handle the COVID situation, because I know people who had a decent portfolio during COVID and they went under because they weren't willing to continue to learn and grow along the way in their portfolio. They're just looking for the easy and convenient comfort. Comfort's the killer of success.
yeah. And that actually reminds me of another quote you actually said recently, which was around growth versus decay, right? And that quote is, let me pull it up here. You're either growing or decaying. There's no in between, right? And so, can we dive a little bit deeper, right? Because that's such a open-ended quote, right? What did you tell us a little bit more about the thought process behind that quote?
I relate it back to physical health just because I like working out, and I've worked out before. I've trained, I played sports. If I'm not training, I'm not getting stronger. I'm not growing towards being the better athlete or better physically fit person. Because the longer I stay on the couch, the more muscle decay, the less unhealthy I get. The more unhealthy I get, excuse me. That's that decay. But the more consistent I am working out, eating right, staying on the training regimen, the better health I get. And that's no different with anything we do in real estate. The moment you step away from doing this, and this is where shiny object syndrome really can kill all momentum created in a method, is okay, I bought a few rentals, I like it, but I'm running out of money. Instead of figuring out how to continue growing within that method, oftentimes some new investors decide to stop this, put it on pause, and then go and do something else. That's like training for football, and right before the season starts, say, I want to go train for baseball because baseball season is going to start. And you stop training for football and you go and train for baseball. And then you try to jump into a football game, but you're not even in football shape. You're in baseball shape because you redirected your attention. That's what happens when you're not growing in your desired method, your desired strategy. And the decay can even be unintentional, because you can justify, well, if I go and flip instead of buy and hold, I'm looking to create capital to then put back in buy and hold, but you're forgetting you're missing the muscle memory needed for buy and hold, and you're learning and training a completely different group of muscles doing flipping. So when you do create, and if you were to come back, you're starting from square one again. That's the growth and decay mindset. And the type of analogies I like to use is it's simple. If I go to a gym and I consistent in, I'm in the best shape. The moment I stop and I choose to sit on the side or dial back on my workouts, I decay in my physical health and condition. The only way to get back into better shape is to dial it back up.
Makes a lot of sense. And so I know in real estate, we have periods of growth and then periods of what we call stabilization, right? How is stabilization different from decay, so to speak, right? Because I guess in the definition of if we're not continuously going to the gym, getting in the reps, but but then we're in this period of like, well, I need to stabilize my portfolio. How do we as investors sort that out in our minds without saying, okay, I'm decaying? Because that's actually a very negative connotation, right?
So the difference between accumulation and stabilization in our community and our methodology of investing is stabilization isn't a decay, isn't a complacency towards growth. It's actually a complementor to growth. Everybody needs to stabilize at some point, because you eventually get too top heavy, where if you don't pay attention to stabilizing, you will come tumbling down. This is where people that grow too quickly, who don't understand stabilization, will come down crashing with their portfolio. Stabilization complements acquisition. So in a sense, stabilization complements growth, doesn't complement decay. Stabilization is making yourself aware of, I need to grow in different areas or specific muscles that support the next level growth. It's not a pause, it's not a retracting, it's a growth, but now we're slightly shifting our style of growth towards more of a stabilization. It pairs with the saying, it's not how much money you make, it's how much you keep. And if we're looking for consistent cash flow like I did, I need to make sure I'm making that consistent cash flow consistently, or else how will I have the confidence to walk away from my W-2 job, my stable job? Stabilization reveals the ability to keep the money or work on the muscles that need to be developed for us to be great at stabilization, so I can go back to accumulation. It's a complement. We like to call it stairs, right? There's a point where you're plateau on a stair, and there's a point where you go up. Stabilization is that flat part that sets you up for the next level.
Okay. So like if we were to use like a fitness analogy, because you were using fitness analogies earlier, it's like you're working on your chest, you're doing the bench press, and you notice, hey, my right arm is a little weak. So you go and do tricep extension, some, work on that supporting muscle in order to get the entire muscle group a little bit stronger and things like that. Is that a safe analogy?
I would use, this is what stabilization, it's the stretching to the lifting.
Okay.
We first need to stretch, or we need to stretch throughout, because if not, we put ourselves at a point where we can get injured. And then injury sets us into decay. Stabilization is the stretching of the physical analogy, or physical fitness analogy we've been using. You gotta stretch. At some point, you got to. You can lift all day, but you're gonna need to stretch before and after, and possibly in between, or else you're gonna put yourself at risk if you're going hard on growing quickly. That's what I view stabilization. It's the stretching aspect, where it's a complement to the end result of being physically fit.
Got it. Yeah, that makes even more sense. Okay. All right. Well, I mean, that covers everything I really want to talk about, right? Like the two topics that we really wanted to cover today was, what stops investors at that 1 to 2, right? Properties, the mindset, the things that are holding them back, and then the concept of like that growth versus decay, stabilization. I mean, are these people in the 1 or 2 properties in a stabilization mode, or is it more of a mindset thing? Are they actually decaying? And if you're listening to this, and after everything that we just talked about, ask yourself that question, right? Like, okay, I'm at that 1 or 2. Am I truly in stabilization, or am I in decay, right? It's a hard pill to swallow, I'm sure, for many. And but what we just talked about here are the exact tools, the exact mindset, and the way to think, right, to break free from that in order to get back into growth and to grow your portfolio to a much safer place. We talked about diversifying, or not just diversifying, but having volume, because more volume means it's actually safer, because you have, if 1 or 2 properties don't perform, you have way more that are performing to kind of float your crops, right? And I'm sure there are many other golden nuggets, some great lessons in here that we haven't covered, but these were the main points, right? And so I'm curious to know, what did you guys take out from today's talk with CJ? What lessons did you guys learn, and what are we going to do moving forward this week, right? What action steps are you guys going to focus on in order to get into growth if you're not in growth, or what are we going to do today to grow? And if we're already in growth mode, can we challenge ourselves to grow even faster, right? And so with that, that concludes today's call. We're at about 58 minutes. And CJ, I want to thank you for your time. If you are not a part of WNN, make sure you check us out at WNNproperties.com. We help investors just like you get started investing in cash flowing real estate, especially if you live in places like Hawaii, California, or anywhere else that's really expensive. We help investors like you get started investing in cash flow markets that are much more affordable, where you can get your feet wet, turn on the light in one of those rooms that, like we mentioned before, and then eventually you'll be able to scale your portfolio up to that 10, that 20, that 100, and then eventually to that commercial level that CJ is doing right now. With all that being said, thank you all for being here, and we'll see you in the next one.